this is IBM Museum. And despite cleaning up a little bit of the cable clutter for all these components and devices on the bench behind me, I'm going to have to go through this to show what I have set up and show what I intend for the system, with a side topic of this video being how I connect on a retro PC to a network. And I can go through with this server that I've getting set up, covers a lot of the older network standards to be able to transfer over items to whatever systems that I go through and connect up to it. So I'm going to get the internal webcam off. I'll get turned around a little bit. And this is one of the 3 IBM NetVista A40 systems I got from Computer Reset recently. And on 2 of those systems, the RAM and the hard drives were stripped out. This system had a 10 gigabyte hard drive that was ultimately bad, which I went through and replaced with a 160 gigabyte unit. I've got plenty of those IDE drives around. And I went through the RAM on this is PC 133. And I've got plenty of that stuff. I went through, I've got 256 megabyte of RAM. The CPU on there is a Pentium 3. I think it's like an 800 megahertz, something like that in there. And these systems have ultimately 5 PCI slots. And so right away I went through and I know, hey, I want to throw a bunch of network adapters in there, and let's see if we can build up a server that has all these different old network types that can be on a retro PC system. We're talking back from PC level being 4 megabit token ring all the way up to the 10/100 Ethernet. I wanted to cover a lot of bases here, and I even have intentions I'll show on later video to go through and to get even wireless set up from this system through a side router that will go through it. And of course, it's not secure in today's world, but it works to go through. If I had an older system with those wireless networks like a WEP encryption, I could get them on the setup as well. Now, the CD-ROM was bad, so I had to go through and put another drive on there. And that's easy for me as well. I've got a few of these around, simple IDE connections. And that allowed me to go through and install Windows Server 2000. And of course, immediately from there, it's got USB ports. I went through and I did install Service Pack 4 for Windows 2000, just to get it to the level that I could go through and get these network adapters installed on the system. So I've got video captured from it. We'll be able to pull it up in a moment to show those different interfaces that are on here. The top adapter is an Intel Pro 1000 GT. And that's actually, I should have color coded these cables a little bit more, but I can individually identify them at least. That's actually got a link back to my home network. This is the internet connection basically into the system. And even though you don't want to necessarily get the retro gear on the internet, it's good to have them networked. This will go through and allows me to get files in from the internet side. It's Windows 2000, so again, it's rather dated as far as the web browsers and everything else it can run. Can't be on the internet really in a modern age, but it will work enough to where I can transfer files through, have even like FTP services and things like that that I can set up on here to grab files elsewhere from my network, from online, and pull them into this server machine and then be able to distribute them out from there. Now, next down, I have the 10/100 Ethernet, and this is actually an IBM rebranded card from Intel. IBM calls it the EtherJet, and that goes to, ultimately for this lower blue cable, goes over to my Ethernet switch that I have my AS400 on. It's got a separate network. I'll go through the point of integrating that in at some point as well. Now, I even had, and I've pulled it down from the bench, I've had where I took the Ethernet connection back, had a Ethernet switch, and could have Ethernet clients, connected onto that. The wireless router that I'll have set up, that access point for the old wireless clients, will be connected ultimately into this line as well. And I can go through and control when that wireless network is active to keeping things locked down. And of course, I'm not really worried about someone being, they'd have to be close by to get on those old wireless networks as well. And I'll try and have those locked down. There's ways to go through and lock those down otherwise that makes it not so much of a trivial thing to get online. Now, the next adapter down is that 100 megabit token ring from IBM. Those PCI adapters I've shown in prior videos. I went through and I've got the latest driver from IBM for this Windows 2000 level. It even covered back into the Windows 98. It's a comprehensive package that covers multiple operating systems, and I could not get this thing to communicate at the 100 megabit rate over Token Ring. Even though the driver is got all sorts of options to set, it just doesn't want to go there. So I'll have to probably work with that a little bit more. I've got a second PCI adapter for that 100 megabit per second Token Ring that I can try installing that under Windows 98 and see if I can get that working, and maybe to the point of getting those interlinked. Now, that goes down, it's actually going just to a passive MAW, and because there's not any managed Token Ring equipment that's able to handle it, I've got a couple media filters, and I'm taking that green 100 symbol to mean that is typically how these were connected onto a passive MAW with just that unshielded twisted pair cabling, this green cable that I have coming off of that adapter. Now, I've got it set to the 16 megabit rate right now from that adapter, and it functions perfectly fine with that. The next adapter I have down is it's a IBM Token Ring. It's a PCI adapter, of course, that is set to the 16 megabit per second data rate. And remember, for Token Ring, whether it's that 100 megabit that I haven't not been able to get running yet, or the 16 megabit or the 4 megabit, you cannot have mixed systems on the same ring, on the same network. IBM called them rings, that they don't communicate. All the stations that are on that ring have to be set for the same effective speed. And that's actually why I'm going through and working this arrangement, because I want to have a separate 16 megabit ring that I use, as well as a 4 megabit ring I use. And so it's this black cable, one of the black cables, this black cable, that I have ultimately going to my 8239 Token Ring stackable hub And that's one that we've gone through in the past, and I've connected on the two laptops that had the token ring interface through this hub and showed the file transfer of those working. And in this video, I'll actually go through and I'm showing a component of that 16 megabit token ring setup as well. And as I mentioned, I do have a 4 megabit, and it's the same style of PCI adapter that's actually in that bottom slot, and it's going to this passive 8228 mod that I have set up on top. So that's kind of the basics of all the networks I have in place. Now, I've got my client ThinkPad off to the side here. Even though it's in the box, I don't have an Ethernet connection that would normally be in, this cabling system, that Ethernet switch that I set aside for now. So this is just going through, and it has the token ring link. And we'll get looking at that client a little bit more in just a moment. I want to go through and get switched over to the Server 2000. And let me get back up on the screen myself. I've just got the screensaver playing away here, of course, since it's been since my intro was so long. But going through, this is what it presents to the system. Let me show also just the hardware that's there on the system. And of course, this is typically organized alphabetically. I'm aware that I have some devices there that are unidentified that don't have drivers, but it's not the network components that I'm working with yet. So these are set up in an alphabetical order, so they're a little bit of the order of course, how I showed them and described them based on their speeds. There's that gigabit adapter, and then the 10/100 Ethernet, then going to that 116/4 token ring adapter that I have not been able to get running at full speed. And then I've got these are the same adapter type actually here, but one is set at 16 megabit per second and the other one is set at 4 megabit per second. I went through and have labeled those in the network and dial-up connections to where I have the gigabit interface. Let me get to where I've get this a little bit more aligned so it fits in my off the side of the webcam picture I have up. But here's that gigabit Ethernet, and we'll be working a little bit with this interface just to show how things are set up. There's the Ethernet that is at 10/100 Ethernet, goes to the switch for the AS400 again. There's that token ring, 100 megabit per second that I have not got able to run at the 100 megabit rate. That's locked into 16 megabit right now, basically. Then we will be working a little bit with this token ring, 16 megabit per second, and then the token ring 4 megabit per second for that separate token ring that's into the passive MAW, that 8228 MAW. Now, for this topic, I'm going through and I'm wanting to set up, and it's a connection to the internet sharing. internet connection sharing called ICS, and that came into place with Windows 98. It's actually fairly easy to set up on a system like this. It doesn't meet the later plan that I have for this machine because it's only able to do one interface that does that internet connection sharing, not all of them. But as I say, normally you don't want all those retro systems on the internet anyway. You want to have them isolated. You want to have them networked if you can, to go through and transfer files between them, but not necessarily that internet side, even though they're not really able to participate in the internet world that we have set up now. You're not going to have a web browser on them that's able to show a current page or anything like that. But there may be the occasional need that you would need internet connection sharing set up to be able to get a system like this. I'm even looking at a system that you'd have 16 megabit per second token ring. How do you get that on your home network and able to get onto the internet? So the internet connection aspect, and actually you get that second adapter, or the whatever network adapter that you want to share internet to systems on that network, and you install the adapter, of course, and get it set up, and you just go through for the properties that for the internet protocol, the TCP/IP, that where you set it to where the actually, in going through and the internet connection sharing, will go through and put the structure in place for the adapter to where it sets an IP on there, that 192.168.0.1, and the subnet mask at 255.255.255.0. That default gateway, as you notice, is blanked out. And then I've got DNS servers that are appropriate to my internet connection in there as well, just to resolve that. Even though, and that's really for the reason that if you set the IP statically, you've also got to populate those DNS entries. It opens those fields, and I might as well go through and plug in, the way that I have set up to resolve addresses. Now, for Windows 2000 Server, I could go through and even set up DNS, DHCP, all that other stuff. For the purposes of internet connection sharing, the limited abilities it has and able to provide, that is, as I say, that's less than I want to do in the end, but it'll go through to where I could eventually have this Windows 2000 server set up to give out DNS to those clients, to assign IP addresses to all the different networks I have connected to that machine, so I wouldn't necessarily have to do it on a static IPs or anything like that. Now, for the sharing that you want to do of this being my internet connection on this system, when you go through and for the properties for it, and of course it has the appropriate values to get onto my home network here, and it's even to where it's obtaining an IP address automatically, obtain DNS servers automatically. So that can even be set dynamically according to my home network. But for the sharing, you're going through and checking this box of enable internet connection sharing for this connection. You're picking, if you have multiple NICs on that, the network interface controllers on that system, you're going to pick which network, and you can only pick one of those if you have multiple networks set up. And in this case, I've got that token ring 16 megabit per second. Now, normally when you go through and first put this in, it will go through and tell you that how it sets up the adapter of what adapter is shared, and that IP convention I showed a little bit earlier. And there is some side settings that you can get into for what applications and services that you want to go through and do. I've just gone through and I've made the entries for HTTP and HTTPS. I think in the internet connection sharing aspect, those are enabled by default for the standard port numbers, but I've had them as manual entries as well. Some of the other protocols, and I say that because there's not a selection within the services otherwise, and that's organized alphabetically for that web stuff. So I think it's enabled by default. I mean, if you're not sharing the internet for the web component, you know, that's a pretty basic consideration in this case. That I'm not gone through and enabled anything like the an FTP server or any of the internet mail stuff or Telnet in this case. But once you go through and you approve that, as I say, it normally gives you a warning message. It'll tell you if it's got everything set up correctly. If you have any other entries in there, you can't have the network address translation that I'm going to use in this instance later on, because it's more full featured for what I want the server to do. If you have that on, it'll warn you, tell you you can't run internet connection sharing at the same time that you have NAT enabled. And it will go through and tell you to disable that before continuing. So that's how we have just this basic setup. Internet connection sharing goes through and it manages that stuff for you. It's easy to set up, warns you what you have wrong. You can do this within 5 minutes of having the machine in front of you in this instance. But it's not as full featured. It doesn't do everything I want to do later on with this. I'm going to go through, I'll get switched over to the camcorder once again, just to show the client system that I have here, that Thinkpad T40, and going through to where on the system itself, it goes through, and I'm aware I don't have the screen captured for this. I can go through and describe enough of the sayings that are in front of me. Now, of course, I don't have any wireless turned on for that. It's kind of hard to see. I don't know if that contrast will come out any better. Not really, for all this, for all the lighting that we have going on here. But the wireless connection and the Ethernet connection are both shown with red X's in this case. And for the being disconnected from those networks. So in the top corner of that, we have the local area connection. And I could go through the same way and rename these for the interfaces. But looking at the properties for that, and the TCP IP settings, at the top it tells me it's using the IBM Auto 16/4 Token Ring credit card adapter. And that's how it actually identifies it, that PCMCA adapter. And on the client systems, you're saying those to obtain an IP address automatically, and the DNS server addresses automatically. And at least for Windows XP that I have on this T40 system, it does show if you go through for the status of it, it does actually show you the address of the adapter, the subnet mask, and all that. So it's showing a speed of 16 megabit per second. I know that's impossible to read on the screen. For the support tab, which is where you see the details of the connection, I have assigned by DHCP for the address type. The IP address, it's actually on that 192.168.0 network. It's being assigned an IP address from the Windows 2000 server. It's got the subnet mask 255.255.255.0, a /24 network, and the default gateway of 192.168.0.1, which is the adapter that's in the server 2000. So once that it goes through over the network and connects to this system, the Windows 2000 server is actually routing internet content down to that connection. So the initial internet connection sharing, it's not even real flexible. That default address at 192.168.0.1 address that is set on the adapter, whatever adapter you're using for internet connection sharing, you're not able to adjust that at all. And later on, by the time that they reach Windows 7, Microsoft changed that. I think it's 192.168.37.1 or something like that. It looks like they took it off to a different internal network address, just to avoid how some of the routers and other things were set up. Because you can't have, on this Windows 2000 server, I can't go through and have these network interfaces on the same connection as my uplink to the server. It goes through the system just goes, it gets confused with what is the actual uplink, and this is that, this is the way, the gateway to the internet, basically from that gigabit adapter. So on the client, we see the right entries that it gets all that TCP/IP information, that configuration from the Windows 2000 server. And of course on Windows XP, at least we have we can go with like Firefox, which it has version 52.9 ESR, and that's like in-service release. That's the last version of Firefox that you can run with like an XP system. You can't upgrade it further, but at least it has a little bit of a basic ability to participate to browse the internet, to work with things, to work with pages that are out there. And I have it to where it doesn't display any home page. It just goes through and opens the connection. But I can go through for a place like the old net.com, and it's able to resolve that and go to that address perfectly fine from this system. It's got the internet connection sharing. So I could even have in some instances where I wanted to connect on a system that I'm could get content from the internet. In that limited circumstance, I could set that up quickly through the internet connection sharing. Now, at a later point, I'd like to go through and set all the network address translation for all these interfaces up and show how that's done on the Windows 2000 server, to have that as a host system for all these network connections, and not necessarily with anything other than an internet connection to this machine. And there's ways to go through, and of course proxy and all that, but just having this arrangement to where I'm having the server is able to get onto the internet or has that connection to the internet to be able to easily transfer things into it, and those client systems, retro computers that can even be on a 4 megabit token ring network, a 16 megabit per second token ring, or those Ethernet at 10 megabit per second or 100 megabit per second, could be connected to this system to get ultimately files transferred over to those systems, get them interconnected as well. Be able to run a very complicated network environment to handle all those sorts of connections. So, internet connection sharing, that's just a side aspect that's easily done with one of the interfaces of this at a time if that were needed. But there's bigger plans for this setup. I'll go through and get, of course, I can get the side panel on there, get a working CD drive that's in there, get everything packaged up to where I even have the system off on the side, always running, and able to handle when I bring in a retro computer and, hey, I need to connect this up to a network. Well, bang, I've got the network connection right there and a way to do that. So if you enjoyed the content, click on that like button, and there'll be a little bit more aspects that I'll cover with this setup. I'm kind of glad to be piecing this together and get it in operation for me. It'll help out tremendously. We are about, at this point, I just checked prior to this video, I'm about a dozen subscribers shy of 1,000. That's just an amazing number for me, and it's actually picked up. I'm going to go through as a 1,000 subscriber level, and I'm not doing it live video. I'm just going to do a video. We're going to pull out that 7496 executive workstation, and I'm not going to mention any of the past in this. We're going to look at how that system, we're going to document. I'm going to have things based on the preliminary data that I know of. I'm going to have some items standing by that I can go through and at least troubleshoot things, be able to cover any instance, because I have not pulled that thing out of the box at all. I've only moved it around once I brought it back, and still have it stored away on the side. But we'll go through and open that box, pull it out. We're going to go through and document that as well and give a look. Ultimately, I'll have enough components around, knowing the composition of that system, that I can get it working. And so that's what's set up for now. When I hit that 1,000 subscribers, and I know that's gonna bring up my count, but I'm going through 1,000. I'm going past it. Recommend this channel to your friends if they're also interested in this sort of content, because that just adds to the subscriber count. Makes me reach more viewers and everything else. So I've got all that planned. Looking forward to covering that aspect. But this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. Thank you.